Hi, in this video I'll help you get to know your car a little better. At the end of this video I've put together a straightforward infographic that summarizes all the key points. Like, subscribe and comment below, it really helps.
So, that little amber light pops on your dash. You know the one. It's not just a warning, it's actually a clue. Your car's trying to tell you something's up. And in this explainer, we're going to play detective and solve the mystery of trouble code P0191.
You plugged in a scanner, and bam, it spits out this code, P0191. I know, it sounds super technical, maybe a little intimidating, but it's the #1 piece of evidence we've got. So what in the world is your car actually trying to say?
All right, here's how we're going to crack this case. We're going to break down our investigation into 5 parts. First, we'll figure out what this P0191 clue even means. Then, we'll look at the symptoms, the evidence you can actually feel. We'll line up the 4 usual suspects, see how a mechanic really investigates, and then we'll get to the final verdict on what you need to do next. Okay, let's start with our main piece of evidence. Understanding the code itself is always the first step to cracking the case. So P0191 points right at your fuel rail pressure sensor. But the real key here is that phrase, range/performance. This means your car's main computer is getting a signal, but the signal just doesn't make any sense. The story the sensor is telling just doesn't add up when the computer compares it to everything else the engine is doing.
Now, this is what makes P0191 a little different from its cousins like P0192 or P0193. See, those codes mean the signal is just too low or too high. It's simple, like a dead phone line. But P0191, that's what we call a rationality code. The phone line is working just fine, but the person on the other end is saying things that are completely illogical. The computer knows the information is bad, not necessarily the connection itself.
Okay, so a code is one thing, right? But how does this problem actually feel when you're sitting behind the wheel? Let's connect this digital clue to the real-world evidence.
You know, when your fuel pressure is all over the place, your engine is basically being starved or flooded with gas at random moments, and that leads to a whole bunch of performance problems. You might feel the engine shaking at a stoplight, or notice it's really struggling to get up to speed on the highway. You might even smell raw, unburnt fuel coming from the exhaust. These aren't all separate issues, they're all symptoms pointing back to the same root cause. All right, every good mystery has its suspects, right? In the case of P0191, the culprit almost always falls into one of 4 main categories. So, let's line them up. And this is where the investigation gets really interesting. A full 40% of the time, the problem isn't even the sensor that the code is blaming. It's a mechanical issue somewhere else in the fuel system. The sensor is just a messenger, reporting the bad news. The sensor itself is the culprit about 30% of the time. And then we have electrical problems trailing behind. So let's put some faces to these numbers. Under mechanical issues, our prime suspects are usually a weak fuel pump or a clogged fuel filter. For the sensor category, well, it could just be a bad sensor. On the electrical side, we're looking for things like corroded wires or a bad connector. And finally, though it's less common, the control module that runs the whole show could be the one at fault.
So, with all these different suspects, how does a professional actually find the real culprit? Well, they don't just guess and start replacing parts. That gets expensive fast. They follow a very logical diagnostic trail.
The investigation follows a pretty clear path. First, a mechanic hooks up a pro-level scanner to read the live data and see what story the computer is telling. But then, and this is the most important step, they connect a physical mechanical fuel pressure gauge directly to the engine. This lets them compare what the computer thinks is happening to what's actually happening. From there, it's way easier to test the rest of the system and pinpoint the one bad part.
And I gotta tell you, this one test is what separates all the suspects. If the scanner says the pressure is low and the mechanical gauge agrees, well, you've got a mechanical problem like a weak pump. But if the scanner is reporting some bizarre number while the mechanical gauge shows a nice stable pressure, you know for sure that the sensor or its wiring is the one lying. Okay, we have examined the evidence, we've identified the suspects, and we've seen how the case gets solved. Now it's time for the final verdict and the answer to probably the most important question of all. This is the question on everybody's mind, right? The car still runs, maybe it's a little rough, but it gets you from point A to point B. Is it really that big of a deal to just ignore it for a little while? The answer to that is a hard no. The risks here are actually pretty serious. An engine that can stall on you without warning is a huge safety hazard, especially on the highway. Plus, running with the wrong fuel mixture can cause permanent internal engine damage, and all that unburned fuel can quickly destroy your catalytic converter,
a repair that can literally cost thousands of dollars. It's just not worth it.
You know, at the end of the day, that check engine light isn't there just to annoy you. It's your car's way of communicating a serious problem. It's a complex machine, and this is it asking you for help. The real question is, are you listening?